Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. My name is John Clark. I'm a licensed therapist, a group practice owner, and a business coach at Private Practice Workshop, helping you build a better business without all the overwhelm. And I'm very excited to introduce today my guest. It's Lisa Haggis. She helps service-based entrepreneurs position their businesses as a one of a kind in their field for higher visibility, impact, and earning potential. Leveraging 18 years of experience in marketing and business strategy, she's committed to cracking the code on what makes a business innately interesting and worth mentioning. Hint, it begins with having something original to say. She's the founder of Realize Your Brand, a high touch business consultancy, and the creator of this substantial branding method, an approach that transforms your growing business into the legacy level brand that you uniquely are meant to create. Man, that's a really good bio. That's one of the better bios I've read recently. So
Thank
you
you.
could you could tell you're a
Thank
good
you, John.
copywriter too, just by that. But Lisa, thanks for being here. What else should people know about you kind of off the bat in terms of who you are and also how did you get here? And then we'll um, kind of open it up today to talk about branding as a therapist in private practice. We're here live on YouTube as always. So if you have questions as listeners or viewers, please submit those in the chat as always. And we also have some pre-submitted questions that we'll get to as well. But yeah, Lisa, what else should people know about you?
Okay, well, I'm just gonna. There's so much in that bio, so I'm just gonna roll from there. What
Yeah,
I think is kind of missing from that story is a little bit of my own personal passion around authenticity. And my own personal journey has been, trying to kind of always find my place in the world, to be fully myself in a way that serves others, in a way that I'm not holding back or compromising or needing to be something I'm not. And before I started my business, I was in corporate and agency life for 10 years. And it was that over and over again, trying to, be acceptable, get ahead, and play the game. And for me, like, the reason why I love branding is because it is the key to being able to completely be yourself and succeed because of it. And so that's really my rally cry, is that you get to show up as yourself. You don't have to be anything that you're not. And that actually, like, the braver and bolder you are with that, the
yeah.
more rewards there are in life and business.
Yeah, that's well said. Quite fitting for this audience, which is therapists. We talk about and think a great deal about authenticity in school to become a therapist, and also in creating more congruence in the lives of our clients, right? And that's a big part of, I would say, what we do is helping them live more authentically, and sometimes removing obstacles to them living more authentically. It's
Mhm.
interesting as a therapist, we also are tasked with how do we stand out amongst what can be a sea of therapists, or in my experience, a lot of therapy brands that look and feel almost identical. Lots of pastels, lots of very, warm, fuzzy language that doesn't really necessarily mean much. And just the kind of predictable therapist brand. I create a warm, safe space for all of my clients, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, who doesn't do that? So I think the bar is relatively low for a lot of us in terms of a lot of therapist brands that are very flat, and so there's opportunity to stand out a bit more, I guess, by being more of who you are.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of times, people, like, they're in each industry, you see how everybody is trying to set themselves apart in all the same way.
Yeah,
And it always does, like, it surprises me to hear people saying things that they think are really original about how they're showing up, and meanwhile, if they just kind of looked around, they would see that actually they're just kind of repeating, like, they're singing with the choir. They're kind of
yeah,
blending in by trying to be different in that way.
yeah. And I think a lot of this because we don't know how to start or how to speak about what we do or who we are or speak to our clients, right? So we just
Mhm.
do what we've kind of seen out there, right? Um, and that's not a very good way to build a brand. I see a lot of what I call accidental branding out there. A therapist who just picks a website template, picks some random colors, just writes off the top of their head, and then they're like, "Why don't I have clients?" Or even a site like that has plenty of traffic but no clients, and they're going, what's happening here?
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of pieces that can kind of go wrong in the whole process of marketing one's practice.
That's such a good way of putting it. There's a lot of pieces that can go wrong, and I can see why that would be so overwhelming when
Yeah.
you look at it that way.
So walk us through kind of how you start with a business owner, and I'm also curious, yeah, have you worked with some therapists, and if so, what's that
Yeah,
been
I've
like? And
worked
yeah.
I've worked with therapists in a few different niches like art therapy and movement therapy, and so I've got a little bit of exposure to the world. I've worked also with a lot of coaches, which is a kind of an
Yeah.
adjacent, I'm sure I'm curious to know what that brings up in in a lot of the therapists out
Yeah,
there.
it could be a can of
Um,
worms.
Totally. But yeah, so the process that I take my clients through is really about going inward first. Like I call my approach substantial branding because I see it as though we want to brand ourselves on solid ground. We want to feel like we have ourselves rooted into the truth of who we are so that we can be bold and brave and put ourselves out there. And a lot of times when people don't take the time to get clear on who they are and what their solid ground is, they're starting to just put themselves out there. And it's like you're a tree
Mm,
without roots. And that's not going to last for very long. And so
yeah.
I work with clients to dig out what I call their brand truths. And I see myself as like being this miner on an expedition to dig out like what are your values, what are your
Yeah.
beliefs, what is your natural personality like,
Yeah.
like what's your character and how you cannot help but make other people feel.
Yeah.
And that's the real stuff that we want to build from.
Yeah.
And so I do that, but then simultaneously, and this is critical, I interview their clients and I get the client perspective and I
Yeah.
look for the overlap so that they're standing on solid ground with who they truly are, but
Yeah.
they're skimming off the pieces of that that will resonate with
Yeah.
their ideal client and leading with that.
That's massive. I mean, out of all the years I've been doing this, which has been quite a few now, that's the first time I've heard of anyone working in marketing or branding with therapists who has that step of
Hmm.
going to the clients or the consumers. And it makes a ton of sense, right? And again, this is, I think, another pitfall of therapists is you see them all the time in a Facebook group of therapists saying, "Hey, here's my new website. What do you guys think?" to a bunch of therapists. We were doing
Right.
this morning in one of my mastermind groups, and a therapist came and he said, "Hey guys, I've got these 3 website templates. Which one do you all like the best?" And my first response was, "We're not your clients. We're not your
Yes.
avatar, right?" And we can't not be blinded by our own kind of bias of, first of all, being therapists and on this side of things, and also, again, really not being his avatar at all. So those are the people that need to be casting their votes on, and giving their genuine reactions to things. We can
Absolutely.
get a lot of gold there. Yeah.
Yeah, a question that I like to ask my clients, like, because we're talking, like, I call this brand character, this realm
Yeah.
of like, what template do you like or whatever. And the question that I ask my clients is like, what are your people craving? Like,
Yeah.
like, what is the craving in terms of how they want to feel? And that should be your guiding principle. Like,
Mm,
over and above what people like. It's not even about what people like or what they think is most attractive visually. It's what's satisfying that inner craving for how they want to feel.
yeah. Yeah, this is huge, right? I mean, core concept with marketing and then in sales is understanding what people want. And in our case, I think good business solves a painful, urgent problem for someone, whether it's a leaky roof or a mental health crisis, right? Or a marriage that's falling apart. And
Mhm.
that's part of, often with our clients, they are coming in some sort of crisis or turning point, right? And the pain is quite high and the urgency is quite high. And so we can connect with them through that as a starting point. And then this other piece about how do we stand out and be, I think, less predictable as therapists, I think is really interesting to me. I've seen people do it really well. There's a guy, if you look up theangrytherapist.com, I think that's what it is. It's, his website is black. There's a lot of black and the accent color is yellow. And his whole brand is kind of like the anti-therapist, right?
Hmm.
The typical
Mhm.
therapist is soft and sweet. And how does that make you feel? What's that like for you? What's coming up? Right? He's angry. He's badass. He wears a leather jacket. His headshots are him on his motorcycle with tattoos. His bio is about how he hit rock bottom with his addiction and his marriage fell apart. Right? He kind of leads with all that stuff, and
Mhm.
he picks at what's wrong with therapy in the industry, right? And of a lot of kind of these fake passive therapists just saying, this sounds really hard versus being real with them and
Mhm.
coming from a place of your own experience and your own truth and all this stuff. So, anyway, every now and then you see a brand like that amongst a sea of really, again, boring therapist brands.
Yeah.
And it can't help but stand out in a huge way.
Absolutely. And like I'd like to add to that because these are exactly the kind of brands that I find, clients see, and what they see is the personality. They see the bold color choices and maybe some angry language or whatever, and they feel as though that's the brand, and then they feel like they have to kind of choose a palette when it comes to personality.
Yeah.
And what I want to point out, which is critical, is that that would fall flat if he didn't have a unique point of view and
Yeah.
something he was standing for at a much deeper level strategically and like through
Yeah.
his message. And then that stuff reinforces that really important position he's made for himself.
There's also some piece about mission that becomes relevant here very quickly, and drawing some line in the sand, right, and standing for something rather than nothing. And in his case, again, part of it is therapist being phony, right, and
Mhm.
being guarded and closed off, or just you know um, kind of plain and warm, or just saying the canned responses that we learn in graduate school, and that pisses him off, and that's part of the engine of his brand. I think it's
Mhm.
very interesting, and I think a lot of therapists should think about what they stand for, what keeps them up at night, and um, and how to communicate some of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, asking yourself, like, when you're really clear on the transformation that you want to provide or support your clients to create for themselves, that is when you can really be looking at it and say, hey, what is everybody else getting wrong about supporting clients in this transformation? And you can see that that's exactly what he did. He decided he wasn't going to just fall in line with the way that it's normally done, and he decided that there's a better way, but that it's better because it gets better results for the
Yeah.
clients.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Maybe you can walk us through a few more questions that you ask your clients early on, or at any stage in the branding process, because I think the people listening right now, um, our listeners are always wondering, what can I learn from this today, and maybe what's something I can take away and try, right? Or if I'm jotting
Mhm.
down notes while listening to this, what could I ask myself in terms of my brand? So maybe, yeah, if you can walk us through a few examples of questions, and then I have some actual questions from listeners here that I'll add in the comments. Yeah.
Yeah, exciting. So, um, the questions that I'll walk you through are kind of in three different areas because in order to build that solid brand foundation, you need meaning, value, and originality. And these are the three elements of the substantial branding model. And there are key questions to be asking yourself at each of these, like around each of these parts of your brand. So we've already kind of alluded to the big question in meaning, which is what do I stand for? But another question that might really help you unlock, why you care about this work is simply, why does the world need therapists?
Right.
Like, in general, like, why does therapy matter? And then more specifically, what does my kind of therapy
Yeah.
matter? And you'll start to understand, why you think the business needs to exist. And that, you'll get some nice messaging from there. But I want to point out, it's not for the messaging. It's kind of for your own connection to it, so that you can stay really focused on your purpose and inspired by it. The next
Yeah.
question that I would ask is, what is the transformation that you provide? And so we could kind of go off into the idea of getting specific with it and niching. But even if you don't, do you actually know what you're helping people create in their lives and where they were when they started?
Yeah.
And can you describe that? And can you break it down into some of the more tangible transformations that are part of that bigger transformation?
Yeah.
And then that would be kind of your value piece. And then for originality, that is, how do you do it differently? Or what do people need to know in order to get this outcome that nobody is telling them?
Yeah.
And if you could just start by answering those questions, you'll have a lot to say, and you'll be on the path to connecting with people, like, in your own unique way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think some therapists will not answer these questions in part because they haven't worked with a branding specialist like you, but also they f- a lot of therapists, we think it's implicit, right, as to why I
Mm,
do this, right? I want to help people, or I like helping people. I'm a good listener, whatever it is. We have to go way beyond that, right? And that's part of why I love what this branding process does. I mean, I'll tell you two examples from myself. Years ago, I was doing a rebrand for this business, and working with a logo designer, and part of his intake process was a lot of these questions around what makes you different, right? Who are you? Who do you help? Even doing competitor research, stuff like that, and I talked about this human element of business that a lot of therapists and a lot of practice coaches focus on, getting clients, hitting more numbers, passive income, this whole thing. And a lot of what they miss is kind of the person element and being connected to your purpose in life and building a business that really feeds your life and your interests and your passions and things like that. And really getting to the center of who you are and kind of your personal brand and infusing that into your business. And so he came back, and in one of the first logo concepts, he called it Business Made Human.
mm,
And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I don't, where did you get that? And he was like, well, I got it from your prompt, or from what you said in the prompt. Fast forward 3.5 years later, that's been one of our longest standing programs, is my mastermind program called Business Made Human. That's exactly about those things. And it's
mhm,
kind of like therapy for your business, right? We address the tactics, the business side is, and all that stuff, but we get very real. We're very authentic. People cry, people share what's really happening in life in the context of, everything. And it's quite different from a lot of what's out there, and people kind of know that. So it's funny because that was something I was already kind of doing, but he was able to draw it out, put it in
mhm.
words, put it into a logo, and then all of a sudden it comes to life, and it's a program now. So yeah, I just
Yeah.
love this process.
Exactly. Like, a lot of times you can't really see what is unique or special about how you're showing up already, what you're already doing. And so the benefit of working with somebody who can come in as an outsider, who, has kind of experience unearthing brands and seeing what is kind of sticky or worth running with. You could get a lot of these concepts that you'll be running with for years and years,
Yeah.
and that just so simply set you apart.
Yeah. We are also very diligent about getting client feedback and written, feedback every 6 months, if not, more often than that, because inevitably they can describe our programs way better than we can. And
Mhm,
that copy is just pure gold compared to whatever I would say about BMH. Again, they can still describe it better than I can because they're receiving it, right? And
mhm.
it's always amazing to get their feedback and their testimonials, and then it makes a sales page, really come to life when you have their words and not just mine, right?
Yes.
It's just huge. We have a question here, so I'll go ahead and post it. It's a bit of a long one, but it says, I'm stuck on the logo. I'm working on scripting my website, but my search for an affordable logo has hit a little snag. I know it's important to have a professional logo, but while I'm just getting started, I'm really trying to stretch my resources. Can I use a nice Google Fonts version of my company name for my website in place of a logo? John, did you have a great logo for your first 5 to 10 clients? Yeah, feel free to dive in on this one. I've got a lot of
Well,
thoughts, but you
I
might too.
I I don't know. We might have different perspectives on it. And
Go for
so
it.
my perspective is that when you're getting started, you don't need to hire someone to design a logo for you. If it's between, getting your copy on your website or even just your messaging on how you talk about what you do, right, or paying for somebody to design a logo, um, don't get a logo. But what I will say is there are better options than just using a Google font and doing that yourself. Like I know, I think Squarespace has a logo designer, and you could do Fiverr. Like there are really affordable options. But what I would say is two things. You know, don't make it complicated, because there's no such thing as a complicated, cheap logo that's any good.
Right.
Keep it super, super simple, classic, dialed right in, and that will be fine for your early days. And the other thing is, the only thing that, like, if you're going to give it any style at all, think back to that question of how do you want people to feel, and make sure that you're going in that direction versus something that looks cool or is funky or whatever else.
Yeah, I generally agree with you. I think my qualm with it is that therapists have a hard time spending money, right? And a lot of times we try to cut corners up front. And a lot of therapists will say, I've got $500 to put into my business, but you're going to turn around and build a six-figure business, right? And very attainable for therapists to make upwards of six figures in private practice, perhaps after a couple of years, but very doable.
Mhm.
If I'm going to open a restaurant, I'm taking out $100,000 in a business loan, for the kitchen, for the uniforms, for all these things. So I really would encourage therapists to go a little further and spend the money up front to do this process, because you're going to get not only the product, which could be an amazing logo that's going to last you, I don't know, 10 or 15 years or forever, right? If it's good enough. And then the other part is it's going to force you to answer some of these really hard questions that you and I are talking about, right? Of
Mhm.
who am I and how am I different? And rather than just kind of branding randomly. That being said, when I created my first 5 to 10 clients, I have to think back. I was out here in San Francisco. The main thing that was different for me out here was my modality, right? And niching down around CBT. That was the main part of my practice. And I had built my own site, but I spent a couple $100 on like a family friend who could make a decent logo. And that ended up being my logo for a few years. What I'll say is that it took what was a very plain looking Squarespace site, and it made it look more legit overnight, right? Because
Mhm.
all of a sudden it had nice colors, the font, it was done right, even though it was, a couple $100. She kind of picked two brand colors that I just went and ran with, and then I replicated those for the rest of the site. And so for a couple $100, I think it looked more, a lot better than it would have before that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, and
yeah,
and I love that point of view, like, because there is a little bit of a shrinking happening when you're like, "Oh, I don't want to invest," because it's kind of like telling yourself that you don't think you'll reach that level of success that'll make it worth it. So I totally hear that, and I like that. And I also want to point out
yeah,
that that photography is actually
yeah,
one of the things that I often do say. Like, if you're going to invest
that's great.
somewhere, the photography can really make the difference. Like in a simple site with a simple logo, great photography will elevate everything. And so it's just
Yeah,
about knowing, and kind of knowing your own skill set as well. Like if you don't have the taste or the eye for any of this,
yeah,
then yeah, you probably want to go and get professional support immediate, like right away, so that you
Yeah.
get off to a good start.
That's actually a great point though with the photography piece, right? Even thinking about a directory like Psychology Today, where you have, a million therapists on there, the first thing they see is your headshot, right? And if you have a, uh, a dimly lit selfie with your ex-boyfriend, cut out with the shoulder, which is a real thing, and then you have a really nice, well lit headshot, with some greenery behind you or whatever, or, you can see your tattoos on your sleeve, like clients are inferring a lot from that alone, and they might skim the first two lines of your copy and they're like, I'm either calling this dude or I'm not.
Mhm.
So this is absolutely massive. Yeah, I think an interesting question would be, if I've only got $500, do I spend it on a logo first or on photography first?
Right. And well, if you've only got $500, I would say the first thing is to know your own strengths. And so, if you don't have any strengths around your messaging and that stuff, I would actually spend it there. But
Yeah.
between logo and photography, I would choose photography
Yeah.
personally. Personally.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because even let's say someone goes straight to hiring a copywriter, and if the copywriter is very good technically, but you haven't done some of that legwork to figure out who you are, right? Then
Yeah.
some therapists will go, okay, just write my copy, or they'll hire a website developer and say, okay, do the design and the copy and just make it cool, right? But
Yes. And
that's a
that's
real
yeah.
mistake as well, right? Because there's just still no identity first, and then you have a very confused kind of random accidental brand, as I call it.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's really, I think it's valuable to point out that there's a lot of terminology out there in the world that kind of means multiple things.
Mm,
And so, when I say get help kind of clarifying your messaging, I'm talking about finding a brand strategist or a business coach or a brand coach or a copywriter. It doesn't matter their title, as long as like the very first thing they're going to do with you is dig into who you are and pull out like that truth of what the business is that you're creating and who you are as a business and a leader.
yeah.
That's what I mean. And so to me that's brand strategy, but you might see it under other names out there. And so
Yeah.
just knowing the outcome is really what matters.
Yeah, that's great. That's really well said. Um, yeah, again, in a perfect world, a therapist would have it all, and you'd have a lot of different people involved in the creation of the brand. Um, Back to this person's question, an approach that's worked for me, as you can see even in this logo in the top right for Private Practice Workshop. This is a logo in a font that took a lot longer than you would think, because this was out of many iterations with my designer. And once we found this overly simple, kind of logo, and it's just three words, but in a very intentional kind of font that's kind of cool, kind of hip. It's very legible. It's very bold. I wanted it to read almost like a clothing brand. This is the font I used for my very first or my second counseling practice, because I wanted it to look and feel almost like a clothing brand, like American Apparel or some kind of urban brand like that. And so we were able to then take that and replicate it for across my brand, right? So for BMH, you'll see the logo is that, right? But he's done it and locked it up right, and the spacing is correct, things like that. It's the same thing we use for the creation of my current practice's logo, Calm Again Counseling. So we've created kind of a system with it that we can replicate. He's got, a nice color palette that we can use, and that, team members can use for, thumbnails and social media and stuff like that. So at some point you might have something simple like that that you can kind of use and reuse, and you just need enough to kind of get started. I think Canva is another great resource too for this
Yeah.
person to look and, create something decent there just to get started with. But I would say keep it simple, keep it really legible.
Yeah.
Don't go crazy with lots of colors or little intricate designs that are going to be hard on the eye. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just noticed that the question says, "I'm stuck on the logo step number 1." And I wanna point out, the logo is not step number 1. It's step it's one of the important steps as you're developing your online presence and starting to put things out there. But Like, we can really get lost early in business with all of these aesthetic choices and things like that. Step number one is connecting with people and talking to potential clients
Yeah.
or building like, step number one is the stuff that makes you sweat, not the pretty stuff that you're going to put out on your website. And so I caught that, and I wanted to point that out because when a lot of times when I work with clients, they might have kind of an old, outdated version of their brand visually,
Yeah.
and it might be years before we actually update it because we
Yeah.
spend time clarifying, their offerings and their method and
Yeah.
getting them good at delivering and selling it. And then when they've landed that and they found that the groove that is their own with their brand, then we invest in doing the next refresh of all of those visuals and the website and everything else.
Yeah. It's kind of like I used to work in construction, and we say measure twice, cut once. I think there's some element of that here where a lot of times we try to pinch pennies up front because we are kind of bootstrapping or using our own money, whatever. And it's kind of like, buying 3 really cheap vacuums over the course of 3 years versus like buying the Dyson now because it's the best, which
Mhm.
by the way, I really like my Dyson. I have a weird like preference for it that my wife thinks is really stupid, but it's just kind of the best vacuum. It's the right vacuum, and I'm not going to buy 3 cheap ones.
Mhm.
I'm just going to buy that one that's going to last 10 years. And I people on the show, who've listened for a while know I'm very big on branding, and I suggest therapists spend a lot more than they think they should spend on this piece,
Mhm.
because when you really nail it and you've really got it, it's going to stand out. You're going to have ROI right away when you really stand out. Um, and I think the other piece is that it can really last. Again, think about timeless brands like Nike or the Nike swoosh. I think we should be thinking about creating a brand. Maybe it's not, maybe my counseling practice won't be that iconic, but a brand like that can last that long, right? There's
Mhm.
a reason why companies invest insane amounts of money into their branding. When they really do it right, it's something that can really last, and it can kind of ride through fads and waves of things, right? And still be a relevant and kind of familiar brand.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah. We've got another question here. We've got about 10 minutes left. The question is, what makes me unique is that my average number of sessions is only 6 when working with kids and teens. How do I promote this fact without sounding like I'm giving a guarantee or promising a certain outcome, which are both unethical? This is actually a really interesting question, right? In terms of what we're offering, right? Our service, our kind of guarantee, our process we talk about. This is something I'm not sure if you know, that as therapists, we generally cannot promise
Mhm.
results. It's unethical for our boards, so we are limited by that. We also can't solicit and publish, testimonials on our site because of confidentiality that we all fall under, similar to a medical office. So
Mhm.
it's interesting. With that being said, yeah, what's your reaction to this question?
Question, what's SFBT?
I actually don't know. I'm
Oh,
assuming it's
okay.
a it's an approach to therapy. It's If it's something I've never heard of, it's probably pretty niche, or but it's a specific type of short-term therapy, I'm assuming, that works with kids and teens. So
Okay. And
yeah,
so I'll just kind of what I'm getting from the question is that what this therapist is saying is they get results faster because it
sure.
only takes them 6 sessions and maybe the average in the industry is like 20 or 10 or something. Is that what you're getting from it as
It's
well?
definitely higher, and how most therapy starts is it's open-ended. So you come, say I have anxiety, and we say, okay, I can see you on Thursday at 11,
Mhm.
and then come back next week and next week and next week. And there is definitely a weakness to this fact that it's very open-ended, and clients don't know, are you following a process, and is this going to end? Am I going to kind of graduate therapy? So to this therapist's point, um, there's some real strength in having this kind of short-term limited model and saying, I have for instance, a 6-week program that I walk you through, and it has 3 clear phases or 6 clear steps
Yeah.
and a graduation date. I mean, that's very compelling, if you ask me, compared to, yeah, just come to therapy for as long as it takes.
Absolutely. Like it doesn't have to be a promise or a guarantee. And so what I would say is like first to really look at why you're getting such great results. So
Yeah.
what is it about your point of view or your approach, and maybe it's just this, and somebody suggested it's solution focused.
Yeah, probably the
Um
solution focused behavior therapy, I'm assuming. But thank you
okay,
for that,
so
Michelle.
is solution focused behavior therapy the secret weapon or the key here? And if so, then
Yeah.
your messaging really comes around that and why that works. And,
Yeah.
letting people, like educating people onto what it is and why it works. And then I love your idea of then you kind of, once you've gotten them, on board with, yeah, this is the answer for me, then you show them that the way that you serve your clients
Yeah.
is exactly that.
Yeah.
It's this solution focused therapy, and it's a 6-week program, and then working within the realm of what you can say people have experienced as a result of that program, you
Yeah.
can show that there's hope.
I really love that. And also, you know, we are designed to try to protect our resources and not make bad investments, right? So if I'm looking at her program and it's 6 weeks to get my child from this painful place to this ideal outcome, that looks a lot better than just the dude who has no process, right?
Mhm.
I encourage therapists to think about sketching out their own process or kind of program, even if it's not um, something that has I don't know, 10 years of research behind it or whatever, but to think about, even in broad strokes, what are the phases of therapy? Like, let's say you're
Yes.
coming to me for anger management. What are the broad strokes phases of therapy? First is, understanding the thoughts that happen that drive the anger. Second is learning what your triggers are. Third is, um, yeah, practicing mindfulness to not fall for your triggers or whatever it is. Like, if you could say things like that on an initial call with a client, they're going to feel way more secure and confident than the person who's just like, yeah, I can see you. Just come on by. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and are you like within the realms of like ethics, are you allowed to educate?
Sure. Sure. And we can also, refer to when there are models that have good results, like this SFBT might have good results, or they might say, on average, clients report 30% reduction in anxiety after 6 weeks, after the 6-week program. You could say things like that or reference, research and whatnot, because that's a little different than making a promise or, a
Mhm.
guarantee, but rather saying, this is generally what research says about our program.
Like if you think of the hero's journey,
Hmm.
which is not something I actually really use with Brett with my approach, but it's coming up for me now, and so I'm
Yeah.
going to run with it. The hero's journey always suggests that the hero encounters a helper who has a tool that they need in order to accomplish what they want,
Yeah.
and you can see yourself that way. And so these parents of children are trying, or teens are trying to find answers, and if you
Yeah.
can be found on that journey of them trying to find answers, and you can guide them to see how this solution focused approach is exactly, or brief therapy,
Yeah.
um, is exactly what they've been looking for.
Yeah.
Like it aligns with the things that they're seeing in their kids, and you can kind
Yeah.
of explain a bit about why it works, then you've given them a tool, and now you just invite them to teach them how to use the tool, or to show them, or to walk them through the tool. And that's
Mhm.
that's promise free. You don't have to make any like bold statements or anything. You're actually just guiding, helping, educating, and giving them valuable insights that they didn't have before, that happen to align with exactly how you serve your patients or clients.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, the more you can help build a client's confidence in you during that initial call, the better. And or even building that confidence through your website and how you talk about what you do and how you
Yeah.
help, and that you have a plan for them is huge. And again, that is already more than what 90% of therapists are doing. I have a therapist in, one of our mastermind groups who treats selective mutism in children, and has um, a very, kind of predictable way that she takes people through this process. Um, that is very powerful, both for the outcomes and also for, again, the marketing piece of being able to show people you have a plan. You're not going to waste their precious time or money, right?
Mhm.
And you know what you're doing, and you are in fact the expert that they're looking for. Um,
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah,
I'll share that, like, you got to be careful not to just put all the spotlight on the tool.
sure.
Like, that is something that I do see a lot, with therapists or
Yeah,
in just health related industries. People who have a lot of certifications and methods that they've learned,
big
and you go
time.
to their
Yeah,
website and it's just like a list of tools and methods, and it's not really about the tool, right? And so, if you happen to use one tool, then maybe we've been talking about that, but just watch for that laundry list of tools, and then you're kind of putting the work on your potential client to decide what they need, and that
yeah,
overwhelms them. And so it's not
yeah,
about the tool, it's about the information you can give them that they didn't have before. And I think of somebody who I follow who does a really good job of, like, informing about just what trauma responses look like.
yeah,
Because a lot of people are walking around with trauma responses, they don't know our trauma responses. And
yeah,
that's a really good example of giving information that empowers them, helps them start to see what they need to get their result. And those are the people who, will build the audiences and the followers and the trust, and then ultimately be able to to get those clients.
that's great. Yeah, we teach our clients to use no greater than third grade language, in describing what they do. To take something as seemingly complicated as, let's say, EMDR. It's a brain treatment we use for trauma, and imagine explaining that to a third grader. That's the kind of level of language we often need to use in copywriting for it to be compelling and non-confusing and non-jargony. We also teach, we call it the copywriting sandwich. You would paint a picture of what the client's life is like right now, the pain points right now in plain language, um, how you help. You introduce yourself and how you help, and then the final part is kind of how their life can be different as a result of working with you. That would just be a quick and dirty way to start to get some words on the page and think about the transformation.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece we talk about is, um, what does the client feel, what do they have, and who are they before and after your service, and just jotting down those notes, right? And really working on what is that transformation. This is where a lot of really great copy and taglines can come from too, in that process. So I really like going through that with therapists.
Mm-hmm.
We've got, and just for one final clarification, I'm losing a lot of clinical points today with my audience. It's solution focused brief therapy, and I do know that. I'm just really tired, and I have a 2-year-old, so that's my excuse. Solution focused brief therapy. Thank you again, Michelle, for that clarification. Uh, Lisa, we have like a couple minutes left. I just want to see if you can kind of think of, um, what's your kind of final parting wisdom, I guess, in terms of what you hope therapists really remember from this episode? What should they do next? And then we can wrap up with kind of how folks can learn more about you and get in touch with you for some help.
Yeah. So what's coming for me is what you do really matters. And one of the things that I notice over and over again as entrepreneurs who, are in a helping or a healing craft, um, are in business and start to try to face those struggles of getting their business off the ground, it can be easy to lose sight of your craft and to
Hmm.
lose your connection to it, and to start finding yourself on webinars about Instagram and picking up business books and, getting lost into the world of how do I make my business succeed? And what I want to offer is that you need to stay anchored in your, you know, purpose, or your why, your mission, around why you do this work. Like, stay connected to your craft. Remember that at the end of the day, becoming, somewhat versed in online marketing isn't your goal. Your goal is to change lives by being the absolute best therapist that you can be. And I'm not saying that that will make all the business problems fall away or anything like that. But if you let go of that, and if you kind of get out of touch with your actual, clients or patients, out of touch with why you want to help them and what they act like, that they're real humans, like the humans and, business for
Yeah.
humans, that these are real humans and that you play a critical role in their life. If you get out of touch with that, all of the business advice, all of the business strategies are not going to get you anywhere near where you could get if you really stay rooted in caring about the people that you can serve by showing up and being in your craft.
That's great. Yeah, powerful message, and something that I think a lot of therapists will resonate with quite a bit. This has been great, Lisa. Again, maybe we can wrap up with just how people can find out more about you and get in touch if they're interested in getting your help.
Yeah, I'd love that. So you can find me at realizeyourbrand.com. So that's my agency. And also you can find us on social media at Realize Your Brand. And that's a Z, Realize with a Z. So I would love anybody who feels inspired to connect, reach out.
Awesome. Thank you again, Lisa, for being here, and for our listeners. This is right now on YouTube. We're here live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. This will also be on the podcast tomorrow. Next week, we are here with Justin Cromer, and we're going to be talking about SEO. So interesting to be building on branding. You got the brand, now what? Let's get it some visibility with SEO. So make sure to be here next week if you all are interested in hearing what Justin has to say. You'll also get an email if you're on our main list about to submit your questions for me and Justin for next week. So another interesting way, and for you all to get some free help from experts every week by submitting your questions ahead of time once you see that email come through. So yeah, there you have it. Lisa, again, thanks again for being here. I'd love to have you back sometime, and really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much, John. I would absolutely love that. And thank you for the great questions as well to the listeners.
Yeah, for sure.